Let me ask you a simple question. How early were they watching you? You might think the world noticed your intelligence in high school, or maybe middle school, when you won that science fair, aced that test, solved problems others couldn't. But what if I told you that you were flagged long before that? Maybe in third grade, maybe in preschool, maybe before you could even spell your own name. Because if there's one thing that secret organizations, whether religious, political, or scientific, agree on, it's this: intelligence is dangerous, and the gifted are never left alone. Let's start with something familiar: IQ tests. They're marketed as tools to help identify potential. But no one ever tells you where those results go. When a 7-year-old scores off the charts on a school-issued intelligence test, what happens next? A letter is sent to the parents. An invitation to a gifted program. A shift in curriculum. Maybe even a visit from someone who isn't on the school's staff list. And that's where the funnel begins. Because those gifted programs aren't just about learning faster. They're about categorizing brains, sorting, segmenting, watching how you think, how you react under pressure, how emotionally detached or easily influenced you might be. This isn't theory, this is policy. In the United States alone, the Department of Education has quietly funneled millions into talent identification initiatives. These are not private programs. They're state-linked databases, tracking gifted minors across the country. And who has access to these databases? It's not just teachers. It's private contractors, tech labs, military think tanks. And yes, organizations that never appear on any public record. Now, you're probably wondering, what would a cult want with smart kids? Let's clarify something. We're not talking about guys in robes chanting in the forest. We're talking about structured belief systems, often masked as elite prep schools, religious retreats, enrichment programs, and sometimes elite internship pipelines. They don't wear symbols. They wear badges. And they don't say, "Join us." They say, "Your child is special." Sound familiar? Let's look at the Montauk Project, a rumored experiment in New York where gifted children were allegedly used in time manipulation research. Or Project Monarch, linked to MK Ultra, where intelligent and emotionally vulnerable children were subjected to trauma-based programming to test mind control conditioning. These weren't just about intelligence. They were about manipulability. They were about finding the perfect cognitive profile: high IQ, low social attachment, malleable morality. That's who they want. Because while ordinary children follow patterns, gifted children bend them. They don't just learn, they reshape. And that kind of mind is power. You think recruitment starts at college? For some kids, it starts at age 5. And here's the most terrifying part. Many parents don't even realize what they've signed up for. Because when someone offers your kid a full scholarship to a mysterious institute with no website, or a summer program by invitation only, most parents say yes. Why wouldn't they? It sounds like opportunity. It looks like prestige. But sometimes it's neither. Sometimes it's surveillance. Sometimes the mentors aren't mentors. The tests aren't for placement. And the building has no windows for a reason. This isn't just happening in one country. There are global equivalents. In Russia, it's the Bright Futures Initiative, Svetloy Budushe. In China, it's part of the Key Child Ascension Pathway. In Germany, they never stopped using fragments of Nazi-era eugenics under new names. And behind them all, a common thread. Find the outliers, control them early, guide their beliefs before they can question anything. Because the most dangerous thing in the world is a smart child who grows up uncontrolled. So if you were ever part of a gifted program, if you ever took a test you didn't understand, if you ever attended a camp where the staff never gave their last names, ask yourself, were you being educated or recruited? Let me paint you a picture. You're 12, maybe 13. Bright, curious, different. You don't fit in at school, not really, but adults love you. You're articulate. You ask deep questions. You're fascinated with systems, language, music, science, God. One day, you're approached by someone who says, "You're not like the others. We see that. And we have a place for people like you." That's how it starts. No hoods, no fire pits, no sacrificial altars, just validation. Quiet, precise, and calculated. Because that's how real recruitment works. Especially when it's aimed at gifted children. You see, secretive groups, whether cults, orders, or spiritual societies, don't want average minds. They want the ones who question authority, not just obey it. The ones who don't just memorize answers, but build new questions. And more importantly, they want the ones who feel like outsiders. Because an outsider, once welcomed, becomes loyal for life. Let's look at how the pattern unfolds. Step 1. Isolation. The child is already different, already alienated, maybe too smart for their age group, maybe bullied, maybe emotionally detached. The recruiters don't cause this, they look for it. Because a lonely genius is an easy target. Step 2. Recognition. They're told, "You're special." Not in a vague, flattering way, but with specifics. Your brain processes faster. You're spiritually gifted. You see patterns others don't. This isn't random praise. It's targeted ego activation. Step 3. Invitation. An offer follows. A private school. An exclusive weekend program. A fellowship. Sometimes it's religious, sometimes scientific. Sometimes it's neither, but always wrapped in mystery. We'll show you what others aren't ready to see. That line, it hooks a gifted mind like a needle. Step 4. Isolation again, this time physical. The program happens off-site. Phones are taken. Contact with family is limited. The child is surrounded by adults who seem warm, brilliant, trustworthy. But every moment is structured. Every question is guided. Ideology is spoon-fed, but always masked as discovery. Now, here's the dark part. Many of these organizations don't call themselves cults. They operate through fronts: elite academic programs, spiritual wellness retreats, avant-garde science think tanks. You've heard the names. You've seen the logos. You just didn't know what was behind the curtain. Take the Finders Cult, a group uncovered in the 1980s in Washington, D.C., involved in child manipulation, strange schooling systems, and allegedly linked to intelligence agencies. The case was buried. Documents were sealed. Evidence vanished. Or look at NXIVM, marketed as a self-improvement group with executive workshops, mentorship programs, even children's curriculum. Behind the scenes, branding rituals, mind control, psychological engineering. And the people involved, highly intelligent, highly programmable. Still think this is rare? Some spiritual schools have been operating for decades under names like Children of the Light, the Omega Youth Circle, or Project Luminary. They target kids from IQ databases, math Olympiad records, chess tournaments, and even online communities like gifted Reddit threads. They don't want your average honor roll student. They want the unusual mind, the one that can be cracked or remolded. And yes, they compete. There are internal reports from former cult members and whistleblowers describing wars between organizations over specific children. Not for fame, not for sacrifice, but for access to potential. Some were tracked for years, watched through their teens, approached at 18 with offers too specific to be coincidence. Why? Because these children represent raw, unshaped power. And if you believe the deeper layers of the conspiracy, they may hold genetic keys, neurological mutations, or even psychic sensitivity that certain groups have been trying to cultivate or control for generations. So, the next time you hear about some elite camp for young visionaries or future world leaders, look closer. Ask, who funds them? Where do they recruit? And why do so many attendees never speak publicly again? Because in the right hands, a genius becomes a prophet. In the wrong hands, a weapon. Here's where things go from creepy to unnatural. So far, we've talked about gifted children being tracked, recruited, and shaped. But what if some of them weren't just found? What if they were designed? This is the part they never put in the documentaries. The idea that some of the most brilliant children walking around today weren't just born with talent, but created with intentional genetic and psychological engineering. Let's start with something public: the Human Genome Project. Officially, it ended in 2003, a global effort to map all human DNA. But unofficially, it never really stopped. What began as science became strategy. The deeper they dug into DNA, the more they realized intelligence, memory retention, even personality traits had heritable markers. And you think no one tried to manipulate that? Of course they did. Private biotech labs, military contractors, and education research think tanks began to explore genetic optimization. Not to cure disease, not to prevent illness, to create profiles. Imagine a child bred for hyperfocus, for rapid emotional detachment, for linguistic mastery, or even something subtler: high pain tolerance, immunity to stress, increased susceptibility to suggestion. All of these traits exist. All are traceable in DNA, and in the right ratios, you get something non-humanly efficient, a mind built not just to learn, but to obey. This isn't science fiction. It's a quiet fact of modern research, and it starts way earlier than you think. In the early 2000s, a series of experiments were conducted under the umbrella of the Child Cognition Enhancement Initiative, funded by a cocktail of university grants and private money, most notably from defense contractors. The stated goal? To understand and improve early learning in children ages 2 to 6. The real result? Dozens of children who displayed abnormal memory retention, accelerated pattern recognition, and unexplained emotional flattening. Most of these children were later lost to follow-up. No public data, no further publications, no trail. Where did they go? Some say into government programs, others say into cult-run academies. But the most disturbing whispers? Some never existed in legal records to begin with. Let's talk about designer children. Not just selected embryos, but customized cognition, enhanced in vitro through hormonal tweaks, audio priming, light exposure, and more. Techniques that have quietly evolved under the radar since the 1980s. Do you think it's coincidence that the youngest chess grandmasters, coders, and prodigies of the last decade all came from a handful of training hubs? That some of them don't seem to have social media, school records, or even consistent childhood photographs? You're not supposed to notice. And if you do, there's always a cover story. Homeschooled, private institution, family wanted privacy. But behind that, labs camps, systems, and an entire philosophy. Why wait for a genius to be born when we can build one? Now take that and hand it to a cult, a group with money, belief, and a goal. Do they adopt an enhanced child and raise them as a messiah? Or train them to infiltrate government? Or worse, embed them in society, waiting for a single trigger word, phrase, or event? If this sounds crazy, consider this. In 2015, a biotech company accidentally published a patent for genetic expression conditioning via dream state audio. It was pulled within weeks, but not before researchers noticed. It focused on pre-linguistic children. It combined genetic modulation with subliminal reinforcement. It was funded by a shell company, with ties to a group that publicly promotes the divine evolution of the mind. Now ask yourself, if the tech exists to design obedience, and the systems exist to raise children in isolation, and the cults exist to provide ideological purpose, then how many of these gifted children are really just free-thinking kids? And how many are sleeper constructs, raised like seeds in a greenhouse, waiting to bloom for someone else's cause? Because the scariest thing about a genius child isn't what they can do, it's who taught them why. You've probably seen the headlines. Gifted teen disappears after science fair win. Child prodigy found wandering highway, refuses to speak. Boy genius drops off the map. Family says he changed overnight. But you don't hear what comes after. The patterns, the links, the stories that never make it past local news, because someone makes sure they don't. So here's the question we're finally asking out loud. Why do so many gifted children disappear? And we don't mean in a metaphorical sense. We mean literally. Every year, thousands of minors vanish in ways that don't follow typical abduction patterns. No ransom, no custody battles, no digital trail. And many of them came from elite schools, special programs, private acceleration academies no one has ever heard of, except the other missing kids. Coincidence? Let's break it down. There's a quiet phrase whispered in certain underground forums. Intelligence officers, former cult escapees, independent researchers, they all use it. The final filter. It refers to a point in a gifted child's path where surveillance ends and selection begins. Everything before that? Just data collection. How the child responds to stress, their willingness to question authority, their susceptibility to guilt, to pain, to reward. Whether they show signs of autonomous resistance, or worse, empathy. Because a child with power is one thing. A child who cares how they use it, that's a problem. And so, they test. You won't find these tests in school transcripts. You'll find them in subtle moments. A mentor who encourages a gifted child to betray a friend. A fabricated emergency designed to provoke panic. A manipulated dream session followed by behavioral observation. And if the child passes, if they exhibit the desired traits, that's when they disappear. Not kidnapped, activated. Some are relocated under new identities, placed into black-budget research programs or ideological missions. Some are taken into underground educational sanctuaries, with no public record. And some simply vanish. There are rumors of ghost dorms, entire wings of prep schools and monasteries that house no officially enrolled students. Surveillance-free, staffed by people with military or occult backgrounds. Facilities funded by trusts with no listed founders. When investigators get close, they're either silenced or labeled unstable. Ask around in conspiracy circles, and you'll hear about the researcher who traced missing prodigies to a Cold War-era compound in Switzerland and was suicided 2 weeks later. Or the journalist who uncovered links between an elite coding camp and a child disappearance network tied to a fringe esoteric group called the Circle of Aletheia. Her entire blog was wiped overnight. Even Wayback Machine links redirect to blank pages. Too far-fetched. Ask yourself this. Why is it so hard to find updates on missing gifted children? Why are their cases so often unresolved, despite clear leads? Why do the families suddenly go quiet, refuse interviews, or vanish themselves? And here's the real kicker. What if some of these children chose to disappear? Because if they've been trained since childhood, indoctrinated, reinforced, emotionally conditioned, then by the time they hit 15, 16, 17, they may want to ascend. They may see the world differently, see us as broken, see their mission as higher. Maybe they're told they're the next step, the architects of a new society, the carriers of a hidden gene, a cosmic blueprint, a divine algorithm. Whatever the belief is, it's not important. What matters is this: they're gone, and someone else is holding the keys. So tonight, if you look back on your own childhood and remember something strange, a mysterious camp, a forgotten interview, a test that felt off, don't brush it away. Maybe you weren't chosen, or maybe you were, and you failed the filter, but others didn't. They're out there, and someday, when the world feels like it's shifting in ways no one can explain, it might not be the politicians, the generals, or the billionaires pulling the strings. It might be the children we lost, the ones too smart to be left alone, the ones who were taken before they could ask, who's really writing this story? And what chapter comes next?